Hey guys, it's Darren from Decibel Guitars here. I've been doing a lot of fretwork lately, so I thought I would demonstrate my method that I use for removing the fret tangs from my fret wire. And I'll show you the reason why. Because I cut my fretboards on the CNC, you'll see one of the things that I'm able to do is I actually have a fret slot cutter. It's a micro tool that's exactly the width of the tang of the fret wire. And that allows me to use the CNC to do very precise fret slots, and it also lets me end my fret slots short of the edges of the fretboard, which gives you this really clean look. You don't see the fret slots, you don't have to fill it. It looks like it's a bound fretboard, but it's actually just the fretboard material itself. So there's no binding, there's no extra processes. So it just gives you this really clean look and actually a little bit stiffer board because you're not cutting all the way through. You've essentially got these rails going all the way down either side of the fretboard, and that allows the fretboard to maintain a little bit of its structural integrity rather than being kerfed all the way through. So because I do this fret slots that way, I do have to remove some of the fret material. Now, if any of you have never seen fret wire up close, you've probably seen it just sort of peeking out through the edge of your fretboard. But basically this is drawn, it's essentially wire, and it's drawn through a set of dies to give it this shape. And modern fret wire has this dome structure on top that's called the crown, and then this straight piece called the tang, and it has barbs on it, which are these little triangular things. And the tang and the barbs are what get inserted into the slots in the fretboard, and that grips into the wood and holds the fret in place. And most people these days are also applying glue as well, so that the frets are glued in, bonds them more securely to the fretboard, gives a better contact, better transfer of vibration through the frets into the fretboard wood. Generally just a better idea. With traditional fretting, essentially fret wire comes either in long sticks or long coils, because of the way it's manufactured from wire. And so you cut it off to length for each of the different fret slots. And with traditional fretting methods, you would just cut a slot the full width of the board, you would hammer in or press in your fret, trim it off flush, dress it and file it and so on. And if it's a little bit short, you apply a little bit of filler. And the disadvantage of that is, and we've all seen it, is what's called fret sprout. And as weather conditions change and humidity conditions change, your fretboard expands and contracts, and sometimes, you know, if a fretboard is fretted in fairly humid conditions or normal conditions, and during the winter months your guitar gets dry, fretboard shrinks, and the fret ends stick out, and you get these very sharp things sticking out. And so if you have fret tangs as well as the crown sticking off the edge of the fretboard, it's not a pleasant experience to play on. So what I can do is undercut that, so essentially remove the tang, so all we have is the crown that's visible. It looks really, really clean. You can actually get fret tang nippers, and I have used those, and I do have a set. They work reasonably well. They work only on nickel-silver fret wire. Stainless steel is too hard. The disadvantage of using the nippers is that it does tend to twist or distort both the tang and sometimes the crown when you do that nipping action. It's almost like a hole punch, and you're essentially punching out that little end part of the fret wire. So I've tried some alternative methods that work on both regular and stainless steel fret wire. And I've used my Dremel tool with a grinding bit, and that worked reasonably well. I built myself a jig that allowed me to sort of control the height and depth of the cut, but it was still a little bit random. Sometimes, you know, with a high-speed grinder, sometimes it'll jump a little bit if you're not quite paying attention or whatever. And so the last thing you want to do is cause any damage to the crown of the fret, because that's the playing surface. That's what we come in contact with. And you know, we want that to be as perfect as possible. So I saw the LMI fret tang removal jig. They actually sell this really nice setup that works pretty well. It's a really well thought out solution. But I kind of wanted to do something a little simpler that achieved the same goal, and so I came up with this setup. And all this is it's a piece of scrap maple that I've put in my vise on the bench. And what I've done is I've cut a groove into the maple here. The maple does have a little bit of a radius. It's sort of like an inverse radius of what the fretboard is, so that, you know, my pre-bent fret wire can sort of sit in there and not move around too much. But the depth of this groove, and I cut it with a ball end burr, a carving burr. So it's about 1/8 of an inch wide, so it should accommodate most fret wire. And it's actually what is it? This is Jescar 57110 fret wire, so it's 0.057 inches wide, and the crown is 0.110 tall. Or is it the other way around? I think it's the other way around. 0.057 high, 0.110 wide. That's what it is. So anyway, precisely cut the slot depth here so that only the crown of the fret wire is in the slot, and only the tang is above it. So what that allows me to do is to hold it down into that groove, use my trusty Nicholson mill file, which has 2 different cutting surfaces on it, and just file off that end of the fret wire, of the fret tang. And what I do is I use these perfect little sort of blunt-nosed pliers as my method for holding the fret wire, and it's actually also a guide for the file. So what you can see I've done here is I've applied little marks to the end of the fret wire. I've used a Sharpie to indicate the width of the slot minus a little bit, just so I've got some room for the fret wire to flex a little bit, because you don't want it too tight in there, otherwise, you know, when things do shrink, you could end up cracking the fretboard or popping the fret out. So I removed just a tiny little bit more than is necessary. But what I do is I just grab the fret wire using these pliers just inside the mark there, so I take the mark right off. So these pliers hold it really nice and secure. Just hold it by the tang, drop it down into the slot, and then with the mill file, the first couple of strokes can chatter a little bit, but if you just apply consistent pressure, it works pretty nicely. Just keep an eye on the depth. When I get close to finishing, I flip it over and use the single cut side, which gives you a little bit smoother finish. It's less aggressive. And just do the last couple of strokes. You'll hear it's, you know, not as aggressive. And there we go. So that is a perfectly, beautifully undercut piece of fret wire. If you can see the shiny surface, you'll see that there's no damage to the crown at all, and the fret is entirely removed, so it'll sit nice and flush with the fretboard. And it just takes a few seconds. And like I said, this works with both nickel silver and stainless steel fret wire. And I did an entire fretboard's worth last night in, you know, probably less than an hour. Another thing I like to do is just take this little brush and just make sure that the slot is clear of any filings, because you don't want the filings to potentially scratch or mar the crown of the fret wire, because that makes for more work later on when you do your crowning and dressing. But you also don't want any debris in the slot to be potentially pushing the fret wire a little bit proud, which would cause you to take off a little bit of the underside of the crown, which we don't want to have happen. So I'll just demonstrate that again. So just gripping it just on the inside of the line that I've marked, put it down in the slot, use the double cutting side of the mill file. Just keep a careful eye on the depth. When I'm getting close, flip it over and do the last little bit with the single cut side. And there we go. So there you go. I thought I would share this with you guys if you're looking at different methods of doing fret tang removal. Really simple. You know, I essentially used tools and materials that have just been sitting around in the shop. I've actually had this file for I don't know how long. I don't know how many fretboards I've leveled and crowned with it, but it's really been just a fantastic tool. Another thing I should mention about the file as well, this particular file doesn't have any serrations on the edges, and that's what makes it really good to use with the pliers as kind of my hold down, because I can actually butt the file right up against the pliers and use the pliers as my guide, and it only cuts on the large surfaces. There's no cutting on the edges. So it's a really, really great tool. So there you go. Really easy, really simple, and really cheap way of removing your fret tangs. Thanks for watching.